the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Hello there, and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. My name is Ricky Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a sexuality educator and clinical sexologist.
And on mic.
Yes, on mic.
Good to be with you, my brother.
Same here, same here. One of my favorite things to do, and certainly one of my favorite days of the week.
Awesome. We are on the radio in South Florida on WNN, 95.3 FM and 1470 AM. And we're streaming on Facebook. If you're watching us live on Facebook, hello.
Hey, thanks for joining.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'd appreciate your likes and shares. And we should just jump right in, right?
I think so, since we have.
Very pleased to have a guest this evening as we celebrate is never the right word, right? But we commemorate.
Should be celebrate.
Martin Luther King Day. We celebrate his ideals and what he stood for.
Right.
But it's not a holiday. It's not it's a solemn commemoration. But, ever since all of our years experience, coming to this weird place from sex ed, and however weird it was we ended up in the sex ed world, there's always a sense, probably even long before we got into this work more formally, but even just in the home growing up, of a sense of some connection between sexuality and social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Mom, this dear, may she rest in peace, this dear conservative little goody two-shoes from the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, total opposite of wise-ass Brooklyn Navy boy dad, right, was so liberal and progressive. And, first she was a draftsman in the Navy.
Right, one of the first women
in the 50s,
in the Navy.
Right, surrounded by men. And she raised, the only woman in a family of five that stood her ground.
Sure, well, and in some ways it was almost kind of providence that we ended up in this field because, Mom used to tell this story that when we, lived in California, we were very, very young. And this is in the 60s, right, early 60s.
I was one.
Uh-huh. And there was an incident where we lived in Sacramento where a young girl was raped, and as a result of that rape, she was impregnated. The parents and the family begged their doctor to terminate that pregnancy. Now, again, 1964, pre-Roe versus Wade. It was illegal. He didn't want to do it. But finally, again, enough please, begged and pleaded, and he finally agreed and said, okay, I will do that, but you can't tell anybody. And, of course, somebody found out, and he was arrested.
Well, there was a protest.
Well, the protest for his arrest that Mom was at.
No, Mom was at the counter-protest, the protest against the protesters who were protesting the physician.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And so, Mom with three little
ones.
Well,
they basically told these women, if you have young kids, bring them because they can't really arrest you if you've got young children in your arms. Right. And apparently they tried to. Apparently we did spend a little time in the paddy wagon.
Knowing Mom, it was like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Arrest us. I dare you.
So, this is sort of, predated everything in our lives. So it didn't seem to be much of an accident. But that idea of social justice and sexuality was definitely something that we did grow up with. And it's something that people are, I don't want to say only recently, but it's really only recently that it's been getting the attention that I think it's gotten. Well,
it's certainly become more obvious than ever that sexuality is political.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Much as I used to naively try and resist that. Oh, I'm in sexual health. There's nothing political about this. Yeah,
Well-
sexuality educator for Planned Parenthood. No, there was
Well,
nothing
there shouldn't
political
be
about
anything
that.
political about that, but it's forced
people
into a
hated
political
my
realm.
guts before I showed up.
Sure,
just
sure,
because
'cause
of
you're
what
one of
that,
them.
because of what that represented.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So sure, the sexuality, the sexual is political, and of course now, in our lifetime, what's come into awareness is that things like gender is political. Right? What is this nonsense research that it's going to take some like 100 and something years to close the gender gap?
Right.
Remember Kristen Schall's brilliant suggestion? Right? So it's going to take 30 years until they're 3D printing organs. Just print out a penis and walk in, slap it down, and say, just pay me.
Right.
What does this mean that it would take 100-something years to close a gender gap for pay equity? But, right, the sexual is political. But nowadays, what's amazing is, and I can't, well, let's just introduce our guest.
Well,
and
but
then-
as a way of doing that, again, because just how to put a point on this point,
Yeah.
that when we look at issues like gender, when we look at issues around sex, and we look at issues around race, again, the intersectionality, to use the new
right,
term.
that's the point I was getting to, yeah.
Yeah, that, and I think these are kind of in our face, political, like it or not. We don't want it to be. We wish it weren't, but we have no choice.
I'm convinced so much of this nonsense and what's going on politically right now has to do with this undercurrent of discomfort with the sexual political. Absolutely. The rise of women in this blue wave,
Well-
and women of color, and old white men are scared poopless.
Especially-
in their depends.
Right, and don't leave out the rise of brown people. And I think this is where all of that comes
Right.
together to breed that fear
Yeah.
that we do see.
Yes, I know she's on hold. Let us introduce our dear friend and real pioneer in sex therapy in Atlanta, ATL, Hotland. Are you on? Is Natalie there? Can we?
Yes,
there
I'm
she
here.
Hey
is.
there, how are you, love?
I'm doing well. It's so nice to just hear you guys' voice.
We are really happy.
Same here, glad to see you, too.
Happy to see you. You're beautiful as ever, and we're just really glad to have you talk to us about this. Have you been listening to us rambling? You get
I
this,
have been
right?
listening to you
Sexuality
guys
and social
rambling.
justice.
I'm so excited about the topic. I was thinking earlier today, like, these are my mentors. I don't know why they want me on the show. There's nothing I can tell them that they haven't told me, that they haven't taught me.
Oh,
No.
my dear, we've been peers and
so-
colleagues much longer than
Yeah,
than
absolutely.
we're ever a mentor to you. And really,
So it's so I'm excited about this topic because I think I do have something to add to the topic. Being an African American sex therapist, being in the sex therapy world as long as I have been, and being able to work with in Atlanta, where the tide has been kind of changing, or like Georgia is. I don't know if you all watch the political news, but it's kind of a
political
Ad
junkies.
nauseum.
has been traditionally a Republican state, and it still is.
A little
but we
bit,
keep
yeah.
edging toward that. We might be purple. We might.
Yeah,
be
you got a little
getting
bruising.
to a blue
Yeah.
state. Yeah. And so it's very interesting to watch and see how that is transforming how people react, how people form their ideas around sexuality, and just the convergence of it all is very exciting right now.
Yeah, and you know, like I sometimes say to my undergraduates and you know, millennials, well, they're getting older. You know, it's happened so quickly. Well, the needle's moved so far so quickly, right? Even we met. I was trying to remember. I guess around 2007, 2008. And then when
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
late mentor Susan, when the three of us did the road show, we went around the country doing those 2-day
Yep.
the practice
Yep.
of sex therapy trainings, and you know, that was relative. You know, 10 years ago, relatively recent, but still maybe 15, 18 or so years ago. You've heard me tell this story. When our dear friend in New York, Judith Steinhardt, stood up at an ASEC conference and said, can everybody just kind of look around this giant room full of, like, mostly white people and, like, what's wrong with this picture, right? And I'm happy to say there's been kind of another revolution. You know, I was just did a search on Psychology Today for Atlanta area sex therapists, and you know what? It looks like Atlanta, and it's just so awesome to see how, and like we were saying, this whole new intersectionality where even queer communities of color are coming out of hiding, and it's just a part of this empowerment of sexuality. So even, you know, 20 years ago, I know probably in most African-American communities, therapy was something for crazy white people. And sex therapy was something for crazy white people in New York and L.A., right? And now look how many sex therapists across the whole,
Yeah, it's becoming more diverse, absolutely, on both sides.
You got to say, it's been exciting to be an early torchbearer in that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's been exciting to watch and see. And I think for me, it's been especially exciting to give people answers that they didn't even know existed. Like, they thought they were just going to kind of struggle forever. I'll just never have sex or anything, and to finally be able to talk to people and have these conversations out loud more often so that they know the answers are available for them. That has just been wonderful.
And changing stigma.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
now, and you know, Natalie, I want to ask you also, because I know in your patient and client population, it's very diverse. Do you, as in the work that you're doing directly, do you see a difference in how people connect to their sexuality, being a person of color versus a Caucasian person? Right? Do you see? Is there a difference?
But I'm sorry, I'm thinking about that very deeply. I don't see a difference, because I think for everyone, sexuality is so personal. I think when it comes up largely, I feel like, for African American females when they start to date outside of the race. And that's when I usually really see it kind of impact how they think about themselves, how they're concerned that they may be perceived by a suitor of another race, and how that's going to play out. And are there some cultural things that they need to be aware of and maybe even scared of when they start to venture out? I think that's where I see the problems. But just kind of my traditional everyday sex therapy cases, those kind of all seem the same, because it's like each person is struggling with, you know, how do I get this thing that everybody else on TV seems to have?
Yeah.
Nice. See, I have this article that I've been reading for a while, and you know, I have so much ambivalence about it, but there's I think some really key things. And if you don't mind, I want to read you just a little passage. I want to get your take on this. And the name of this article, and it's from the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's a couple of years old. It's from the end of 2012, and it's called "Who's Afraid of Black Sexuality?" I'm not sure if you've read that, but there's a passage here that I want to run by you, and this is from a professor of African American Studies at UCal Berkeley, and here's the quote. It says, "How do you talk about black sexuality when the very notion that there is such a thing, that black sexuality is distinct from human sexuality, period, or that it has some classifiable existence in the world that makes it different from the sexualities lived and practiced among other peoples and cultures in the world, is an expression of an essentially racist logic?"
Ooh. Oh, my gosh. I don't even know where to dive in on that statement. Let's see.
Wow, that's
I mean, it's pretty heavy. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, you know, the fact that we can even consider black sexuality is kind of, again, referring to that as sort of a racist.
Racism, sure. It shows that the answer to the question, who's afraid of black sexuality, most people, a lot of certainly people of privilege who are still afraid of black people.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. What does the article go on to say?
Let's see. It basically it goes on to talk about how, especially really going through the history of some of these
The stereotypes and cliches.
Yeah. I mean, when we
You know?
look at what was the first moving picture, right? Birth of a Nation, most racist screed, and I don't think we've really gotten far away from that, where we have people that are afraid of black men, very judgmental and very sort of marginalizing of black women.
Yeah.
Right, and like Natalie brought up, you know, the issues that some black women may go through about dating non-black men. Look how
And what that kicks
society does not look the same way as relationships between black men and white women.
Correct.
Right? And it's still just a lot of old fears and a lot of old scabs that get...
Definitely so. Definitely so. And so I'm interested to see how this will continue to change and to continue to grow, even in light of the Me Too movement and some of the things that are going on a larger scale. Will that turn the tide as well, whereas more people have more voices, period?
Well, I think the freshman class of Congress is a hell of a start, right? I think the new incoming members of the House of Representatives is starting to look more like America. And I think, you know, came close in Georgia, came real close. But I think we have not seen the last of Miss Abrams. And
No, I don't think so either.
You know,
I hope not.
I think that's, I'm really hopeful that it's going to be one of those times when the inertia just barrels over the old prejudices that try and, it's just
I think so.
This
And I
is the
think
country we live in
hopefully,
now.
as we see that more diversity, then we'll start to also see more diversity in sexuality, and some of these old stereotypes will continue to fade away. So I think what keeps them alive and active is the not knowing, is the not seeing. And so when you see people in leadership, when you see just people out loud, kind of living out loud, like a Stacey Abrams, then I think it does help to ease the stereotypes, because you're no longer left with just, you know, the monster in your dream.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, do you find that people are like resisting that? In a sense, wanting to keep the status quo?
I think I have not. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the elections kind of show that's all of us, right?
Scared of change, yeah. And what it's going to do with them, and you know, it's that old saying: the devil you know is better than the one you don't.
Yeah.
And so some people just want to hold on to, me included, what we know because it has been safe. And so I think as times change, I think we will all be challenged fundamentally. Like with simple question is, do I as a woman trust a woman to lead? And we've seen that some women say yes and some women say no, I'm not there yet. And so it'll be very, very interesting just kind of to see how everything continues to change. It's just, these are very exciting times in America.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little scary, but exciting at the same time. Gets the way it's supposed to be, right? Like a ride.
See, I also I like what you just said. You know, even as a woman, do you trust another woman?
Right.
Is there any? Again, I'm looking because there's still so much of this stuff that's here that I just can't. I mean, sometimes it gets all this Brett Kavanaugh stuff, all these women that were not believing. You know, all of these women, and part of that, the women that resist the Me Too and take that sort of challenging and not believing side. Is as an African American woman, having just said that about women, is there any difference in your level of trust for women of color versus Caucasian women? Because I think some people do make these kinds of distinctions.
They do. Definitely so. And let's see, I don't know if I've sat with that question myself. I feel like, I don't know. And I think there definitely is a distinction. I think one of the things, the positive is that African-American women have traditionally always seemed very strong, matriarchs of their family. And so I think that is something that is a wonderful positive to help us, get into these higher echelons of leadership. And so hopefully that will continue to carry us on. We'll see. but definitely it's very interesting to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I was going to add to see that leadership also happen in our professional organizations and psychological organizations, medical, and especially sexological organizations is really, really exciting because that's where the stigma busting happens.
Yeah.
It is. And so one of the things that I think I've recently seen is to kind of bring this back to the sex arena is I think I'm seeing more people have or more females take not leaps of faith, but to go get sexual experiences for themselves, like in a way that they haven't in the past. Kind of there's a new a wave, and maybe it's just millennials in general who they want more for themselves than traditional the marriage. They want to try, and so I have young ladies sitting in my office saying, well, I want to try to be a dominatrix, or I want to try to do this sexual thing that I've never done before, and I feel like I have that right. And that's very refreshing to see somebody say, I want to take on the world, and I'm going to include my sexuality in that. That's going to be one of the things I'm going to explore. I'm going to climb Mount Everest, and I'm going to try to do, I'm going to go to
and demand my own pleasure.
And so it is
it's very empowering
to see. It is very, very empowering, and I think, especially with African Americans, they, as everything is shifting and changing, are feeling more empowered to step out of their boxes and do things differently. And so, like in Atlanta, we have a huge African American poly population, which is exciting, and they're growing, and they're expanding across the nation because they're saying we are now able to step away from the traditional norms of our culture and embrace something that works for us. And I think that's so exciting to be able to support these people as they say, I want to do life in a way that works for me. I want to do life in a way that's going to work for me and my family, and it doesn't have to fit into any previous mold.
Excellent. And I think that's so important, especially for women of color, because I still think there's a lot of swimming upstream that's happening. You know, when we don't really hear about, and again, some of the, I think the marginalization and some of the just out and out racism isn't as obvious, I think, as some people would acknowledge. Like, we've had all these situations where here is a young white girl who was kidnapped or was abused in some way and violent. That makes the news. We don't hear that every day happening to girls of color.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's not news.
Yet we know it is.
Right? And I think some of those kinds of, that's, to me, that's a part of that marginalization, that we make things like the rape of women of color something normal, right? That we don't look or think twice about it. When even a lot of police officers and judges have said that if there's an issue of sexual assault, their first thought about who it was a man of color.
The disproportionate number of transgender victims of assault are women of color.
Yeah.
And again, there's too much normalizing. But you know, when I listen to the playback of the show, I'm going to crop what Natalie just said a minute ago, and like that's a definition of sexual freedom. That one that should be written down. That's worth repeating, right?
Well, please do.
That's what we're all
repeat it.
That's what we're. Well, I can't. You know, I have to. It was.
I know. Yeah, you got to watch.
A couple of sentences.
To the playback.
No, it was just really well said, and then you jumped into your point, so I can't repeat it. All right. But it was beautiful, and that's what we're all working for, right? But as you were saying. Especially, and as you were both saying, especially for women, you know, how many years we've been kind of mind-popping our undergraduates by making out, by reminding them that, you know, 60 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, a wife was still the legal property of her husband, of any race, of all races, right? So, again, Go ahead.
And it's so interesting you say that because I actually was having a conversation with a friend and colleague today about a young lady who felt like her virginity was taken from her. And the conversation being, okay, but you're 30 now and you showed up. And so do you have any ownership in that? And really kind of challenging her of what happened, and are you just falling into old cultural norms because you haven't developed a new story for your sexuality. And it's very interesting to have this conversation about, does it get taken if you stand up and consensually give it?
That's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what does that now mean? Because culturally, historically, it meant that you could not get married, that you were now damaged goods. That's no longer the case.
And marriage, too. Remember, marriage was just transfer of property, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so I'm enjoying having these conversations. And I think we're poised at a time like never before to have new conversations and kind of mind blow. People's mind is like, oh, yeah, you're right. It probably didn't get taken.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I also want to point something out that you just said that I also think is very brilliant and such a wonderful characterization and something that, we can work with people so easily on in this kind of framing. But when you kind of ask the question, what is their story of their sexuality? I mean, all of our sexualities are a story.
Definitely.
But it may be a different story to you than it is to me, even my own sexuality.
Yeah.
So how are we even telling and how are we even connecting to our own stories?
Right.
What we live, what we project. Right?
And what meaning we're taking from that.
Yeah.
Definitely so. Oh, excellent.
That's a great framing. I really like that because I like narratives. I like the storytelling aspect
We're all
of it.
story junkies in this line of work, aren't we? We just get so attached to people's stories. And well, I did warn you ahead of time that this half hour really flies. So just I know we're going to start to hear music in the background soon, and you know what the music means. So please tell our listeners, especially anyone in ATL, how they can get in touch with you.
All right, if you're in Atlanta, it's as simple as going to atlantasextherapy.com. I would love to have a great conversation with you and to hear your story. And thank you guys for having me on. I so appreciate you thinking about me. And I'm so honored.
Oh, Natalie, it's our pleasure.
It
really, it's been
is.
too long. We hope we'll see you at the ASEC conference this year. And really wish you the best.
Yeah,
right,
you're doing
have a
such
good
great
night.
stuff, and really, and that's not smoke. I mean, it's not easy to do what you're doing, even in a place like Atlanta. A lot of people think that, well, this kind of work, you want to be in big cities. That's not really always the place to be to do this kind of work.
Right.
I like what I get that it's exciting. It's an exciting population now, and it's the stigma. People much more open and willing to, even men.
Yeah.
Right. And couples.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Keep
Y'all
doing
have
it.
a fabulous
So,
night. Thank you again.
Good on you.
And to everybody who's joined us tonight, thank you again. We'll be here next Monday and every Monday at 9 o'clock for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Yes, indeed. And again, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for listening.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.